Okay, so now we're going to look at 5 hands I selected out of the database where I called turn and raised river. And admittingly, I wanted to pick out hands I thought were more interesting or fun, or um, basically I wanted to talk more about the bluffing aspect, because I think the raising for value aspect is pretty clear. When you check back, call turn, and have a good hand in the river, you raise when they bet. So I tried to select mainly bluffs here. I think I have one value bet I just wanted to talk about, show kind of a unique example. But I have 5 hands across various stakes, across various years. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about here, and I also want to discuss quickly. Actually, I'm going to go full screen here just for a second before we jump into this. I do want to talk about bet sizes, and I also want to talk about having 2 raise sizes on the river, because when you call the turn and raise the river, you're going to find that there are 2 spots in general. There are going to be spots where you want to have a smaller raise size with all of your hands, because neither player's range is capped, so it makes sense to have, or maybe even your range is capped, so it makes sense to have a smaller raise size. And then you're going to have spots where you're going to want to have a smaller raise size and a large, probably all-in size. Now, I have always been an advocate of using massive sizes to win small pots, because you get to bluff more. As your opponent's odds become worse, you get to have more bluffs in your range. And also because of the way the big blind ranges work pre-flop, they end up being capped in a lot of spots where I just don't really think that if you raise, you're ever going to face a 3-bet. And so because you'll never face a 3-bet, your value hands are going to want to go all in to try and win the whole stack, and thus you get to bluff as much as possible. So when we talk about these rivers, I'll open with saying, should this be a 1 raise size spot or should this be a 2 raise size spot? And we'll talk about things to consider on that note. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in the first hand, playing some massive stakes here at $1, $2. It's actually from this year somehow. I must have been streaming or something. And I open ace queen, get a call. Check, and when we have an ace high like this, we're generally checking it back. If we bet, kind of ruins our showdown value, so definitely a check back on the flop. Turn, we have a hand that we're not super thrilled about. Definitely going to call and play rivers. Of course, we river the nuts on a 10, and when we have the ace of spades, ace of playability on different rivers as well. We will also have improved to some kind of strong hands here, though. We could definitely have a hand like queen queen, ace 10, queen jack, queen 9. So there's certainly a chunk of hands that we can have here that have improved it dramatically, and we're going to look to play some rivers. Okay, so here my opponent bets $17 into $24. And we have to think sort of about what he's representing. He's not really saying that he has a boat here. He's saying that he has either a straight or a flush. Realistically, though, there's not that many flushes, because let's say he has a hand like king 4 of spades or jack 4, well, it's not even possible, like king 4 of spades. That hand's primarily going to be checking the turn, because if you bet king x of spades and get raised, it's a tough spot. But additionally, because if you bet and get called, it's not very clear on the river whether you should go for value or not. So I would say in general, king x of spades is going to be checking on the turn. And then jack x isn't possible either because of the jack of spades being on the board. So when he bets turn, bets river, he's saying either I'm bluffing, or I have a 10, or I have a flush. Now, here's the problem for the big blind, and there does seem to be some merit here for the big blind to not really want to bet almost any hands. I mean, I understand that the big blind will have some flushes and straights, and those are generally good, especially the flushes. But the thing is, the big blind doesn't really have boats here. You shouldn't really be betting hands like queen jack or jack 9. And you're not going to have hands like king king, queen queen, 9 9, jack jack pre-flop. So I think this is a pretty reasonable situation for the big blind to elect to check almost all of their hands. Maybe a small portion of bets with flushes and some bluffs could be good. But in general, I think we're going to be looking to check all of our hands, especially when you consider that the small blind can have so many of these strong hands that the big blind can't have. Anyway, he decides to bet. And in these spots, you generally want to be using a very large all-in size. I don't think we would... It's actually an interesting spot. I told you that, the first thing we talk about is, do we want to have 1 or 2 sizes? Well, here I think we want to have 1 size, and I think that size is all in. Because if you have a hand like the nut flush, you're basically just not ever going to be beat, because they just really can't have flushes that beat you. So I don't really see that much value in having a non-all-in size. Maybe if you have like the king or 10 high flush, you could have like a very small raise size. And the way that you can balance those raises out, and this is an important factor to think about when having two raise sizes, when you do have two raise sizes, it's important to put some of your very nutted hands, in this case queen, queen, or queen, jack, and put those into the small raise size sometimes and the all-in size some other times. So maybe you want to have a small raise size here in the river, so like, around 3x their bet, with the nut flush, or rather the second nut flush, the 10 high flush, if you can really have that, which you can't really have, you're going to be betting those in the flop. So maybe just the king high flush and possibly like an 8 high flush, that's also kind of unlikely. And you could balance that out by once in a while also taking that size with a hand like king, king, or queen, queen, or queen, jack. But you would only have to do that very occasionally because you're not going to have many of these hands very often. And additionally, if you have king x of spades, you might be betting the flop to begin with. So in this spot, it doesn't really make that much sense to have much of a small raise size. But whenever you do have a small raise size, you want to make sure to mix some nutted combos in. Now, the primary line you should be taking with those combos is a large size because they benefit the most by going all in. And should you raise here on the turn, you're not going to get jammed on ever. They're never going to be jamming on you. So because they can't have those boats. So in those situations, you should use a small but balanced raise size. And when we have either the nut flush or when we have the nut flush or a boat, we're going to go all in. So let's think about our combos we can have here. I would be putting some king, king in my flop check range. So it's definitely possible to have some of those. Let's just call it one combo. We're going to have king, jack. No, sorry. No, we're not going to have any of the king, jacks. We're going to bang all those. So we're going to have the nut flush. So we're going to have something along the lines of 6 or 7 combos of that. We're going to have the all queen, queen. We're going to be checking that back on the flop. So we have 3 of those. So we have something like 9 or 10 combos. All queen jacks. And there is 8 of those. So we're going to have something along the lines of 17 combos. And then we can't really have jack 9. So we're going to have something along the lines of 16, 17, 18 combos of value. Now, because we're using an all-in size here, we're going to get to have much closer to 1-to-1 in bluff to value. In the earlier spots we looked at, when someone bets 2/3 pot, or rather when you're going to bet 2/3 pot, you have to have about 60% value. But in this situation, you end up being able to have a lot more bluffs because you're simply offering them a much worse price. So, sorry, I meant to say 70% value, not 60% value. So anyway, the question becomes, what do we have to call? Well, if we have a 10 here, we have to call. If we have a jack here, we likely have to call. So the question is, what hands do we fold? And we should be folding our 9x, that called turn, like ace 9. Our queen x, but we don't really have too many of those hands, but maybe some queen x. And then maybe some king x without a spade, but with a spade, you probably have to call your king x. So now the question becomes, what should our bluffs be out of the weak king x, or the non-spade king x, I should say, and the queen x? And I think pretty clearly ace queen with the ace of spades makes one of the best bluffs. Now, the counter argument would be, should it be queen 9? Because we're going to have 16 or 17 combos of value. Given our all-in size, we should have like 12, 13, 14 combos of bluffs. So if you wanted to use queen 9 and ace queen with the ace of spades, that is 12 combos. I think that's a pretty nicely built range between having king, king, queen, 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 jack, nut flush, putting some portion of those boats, but only a very small percentage into the small raise range, and then needing about 12, 13 combos of bluffs. I like using queen 9 and ace queen, ace of spades the most. So we went through, we established the sizes, we established the value, then we establish the bluffs. And as far as the smaller size, we also want to make sure that we work in some bluffs. So what I might do is pick, maybe I pick my strongest king that can't call, that also, I only pick a very small portion of that. So maybe in this spot, I'll take king 8. And I know that king 8 through king 2 are all the same value, but we have to have some way of deciding between them in a spot where removal isn't relevant. So the way I would do it is fold king 2 through king 7, mainly fold king 8, and then take a very small percentage of king 8 and raise small. Because you're getting a worse price and you're not taking this line with many hands. You probably have something to the extent of like between king x suited and the few boats, you probably have 10 or 12 combos of value. So you need to have about 4 or 5 combos of bluffs. And you have around, you have around 12 combos of just king 8. So you could take about half your king 8s, a little less than half your king 8s, balance it out with your king X of spades, balance that out with 1 or 2 combos of your boats, and call it good in your small raise range. Now, if they do jam on that small raise, you're going to have to call it off with some king X of spades, because if you only call those like 1 or 2 combos of boats, you're going to undercall. So I think it would be important here on the river, should you decide, or should you raise small and get jammed on, to maybe call with king 8 through king 6 of spades and fold through king 5 of king 2 of spades, fold your bluffs, and call your boats. Now, I know you're thinking, Doug, this is like, you're getting really into the nitty gritty here, but the thing is, we have to make it so that they can't just jam these bluffs against us and expect to see much of a profit. So when we establish our raise ranges, we always also then establish what we should be calling facing a jam given the price that our opponent is getting. And here we would need to call about something along the lines of half of our hands if we raised small and got jammed on. And so that would be about half our hands, king 8 through king 6 of spades and boats. Now, this is a conversation we've actually talked about several times. Should we be looking at things from a removal standpoint or from a linear standpoint? And generally speaking, I prefer a linear standpoint just because it makes it easy to establish frequencies. But in spots where the removal is relevant, such as having ace of spades here, you're going to want to pick hands that removal plays a larger role. Now, in this situation, king 8 through king deuce are all the same because you have a spade you're calling to begin with because you block the flushes. So essentially in this spot, ace, queen, queen 9 are going to be going all in conjunction with most of our boats that are not flushes. And king X of spades, 1 or 2 combos of our boats, and then some of our king 8s will be bluffing with a small raise. And you're going to have to get good at, and obviously it gets through because it's going to be on the video. You're going to have to get good at learning how to do all these things on your own. Okay, so this hand's weird. I put this hand in here because I don't think I ended up liking what I'm going to do here. But anyway, we check back 10, 10, 2. Turns a 9. Face an over bet. And we call. And the river's an ace. So, and I can't exactly remember what my exact range was here because this hand happened, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and time goes by. So the question is, what should we be doing here? And I think for starters, we are going to have a few 10x that checks back the flop. So we can have some trips. And when we face this turn bet, I think the size is important. We face 616 to 440. So I'm going to flow a few ace highs, but not many against this size. Like pretty much ace jack through ace king. On this river, ace of diamonds, face an overbet. We got to think about the way we're going to want to play our range. So for starters, our opponent is betting 2.6K to win 4,400. So we're not actually going to have to call that frequently. Let's pull up the calculator really quick. All right, so we can fold 60% of our range. We only have to call about 40%, which means we can be particular in our calls. And we're going to have a few 10s that check back. Those are clear calls now. After that, we have ace king through ace jack with a diamond kicker. It's going to be about a fourth of them. So those are all going to be good calls. And then after that, you know, maybe we have, what else needs to call? Maybe a couple of 9s. Maybe a hand like king 9, king of diamonds needs to call as well. Now, here's the thing about ace 9 that's interesting here. I will be checking back aces on 10, 10 deuce a lot. Because aces, when you bet on these low paired boards, ace highs are probably the most common check call. So you block way too much of the value to be betting aces on the low paired boards, or on the middling to low paired boards that frequently. And so I think on ace unpaired boards, aces specifically, I generally lean towards checking the flop. You know, maybe you could bet a small amount. Maybe you could base it a little bit more based on what your opponent's doing on the flop. The more they fold, the more you should check. But I'm going to have ace-ace here. And then I also am going to have 10 deuce. When you flop the full house or you block both cards, in general, checking it back is the stronger play. Now, I'm not going to have 10 deuce off because I'm not going to open that. So I only have 10 deuce of spades, 10 deuce of hearts, and 3 combos of aces. Outside of that, I can have the second nut flush. I probably check back some king X of diamonds hands. So, you know, I'm looking at like 2 combos 10 deuce, 3 combos, or maybe even 2 combos ace ace if I'm betting some small portion, and then something along the lines of 5 combos of the nut flush. So I can only have around 9 combos of value here. I don't think I'm going to have 9-9. That's going to bet the flop. I don't think I'm going to have 10-9. That's going to bet the flop. And you can't raise lower than a flush. Maybe I could have another 1 or 2 combos of flushes, but that's kind of it. So we're gonna have only 9 or 10 combos of value, maybe even 8 combos of value. And in the paired board spots, I guess to contrast the last quote paired board compared to this one, we're not gonna have an all-in size here because really the only hand that we'd want to go all-in with is aces. And when we have a hand like 10 deuce or we have a hand like the nut flush, we're going to want to go for a small raise. Generally speaking, when I only have one kind of hand that wants to go all in, and even then my opponent can easily have ace 10. So neither player is capped. It's a static board. I only have one hand that beats their range. I generally don't lean towards having 2 sizes. I generally just go for the smaller size so that I can protect my my thinner value raises. You know, let's say I raise the nut flush here and I get jammed on. Well, I can fold some or maybe even all of it. Maybe I wouldn't fold king 9 of diamonds because I block some boats, but I can fold most or maybe even all of it, knowing that I'm going to have ace, ace, and 10 deuce, which will help me balance that range out. So I like a small size, and I also like a size that forces my opponent to have a tough spot with a 10. Because really, if they bet and I raise here, they're going to be calling flushes. The question is, what are they going to do with 10x? So I decided to raise here with ace 9, and I mean, to be honest with you, it's definitely better to call with the ace x with the x being a diamond than ace 9. So this hand does seem just below a call, and it does block 10-9, and it does block ace 10. So overall, I like the decision to use this exact hand as a bluff raise. It makes sense to me. The question is, what frequency can you really use it? And so our opponent is now going to be getting 2.2 to 1 to call. So we can have 31% bluffs. But we're going to have a little bit less than that because of removal. So in this situation, we're going to have more like 28, 26% bluffs. I'm kind of estimating that. You know, if he has a 10, he's not going to know how much removal that really matters. It actually would only block 1 combo. So it doesn't actually change that much. If he has a hand like this, the nut flush, it blocks us significantly. So when I'm picking the amount of bluffs, I'm kind of ballparking like, all right, it has to be less than that number or else all of their value bets can just call profitably. So I kind of ballpark what the average amount of removal that I think my opponent has is, and then that's the amount that I end up looking to kind of base my play around. So let's say that this is something along the lines of 27, 28% bluffs. So we have 9 or 10 combos. That only means we can bluff like 2 to 3 combos of hands, right? You know, maybe 3 combos of hands to make it easy, which means we have to be very selective. And we have 9 combos of ace 9. So maybe if I came to the conclusion here that ace 9 should be bluffed a third of the time, I like this play. That said, it was 2014 and I was more aggressive in a lot of spots. I could see myself trying to bluff this too much because it's double paired. But I think I would pick out some portion of ace 9. Whether I knew it was a third on the fly or not is tough to say. But there's not that many value hands I'm representing here. And traditionally in those spots, you want to be very careful with which hands you elect to bluff with. Okay. And did not get through. King 10. It's interesting. I mean, it's better for him to have a diamond, right? I mean, if he has king 10 with king of diamonds, clear call. Is it better for him to bet call flush for 10? Probably better for him to bet call a flush because he blocks more nut flushes. So, I mean, he has to make some folds, right? I'm risking 9.6 to win, not a very large pot. Sorry, 8.6 to win like 4.5. I mean, he can fold like 2/3 of his range, which means that this hand particularly seems like maybe a fold. I mean, 10x with a diamond, flushes. You could make an argument for this being a reasonable fold. That said, no, I think I like this being a fold, but, you know, what can I say? I'm a nit. All right. I guess if he thinks that he's betting all 10x twice, and he has to call some non-10x, some non-diamond 10x, king 10 does make sense. So if he's planning on folding like 10-8, 10-7, jack 10 without diamond, calling all 10x with a diamond, and then folding some portion of the 10s that are, jack 10 or lower roughly, I'm okay with that too. Excuse me. All right, so here we have a hand open up ace jack. Get a call. Check, check. And this hand can be split and flop. Some bet, some check. Turn probe. Clear call. And river 9. Okay. I remember this hand. So this is an interesting spot because some players really argue to just not bluff here because you're not going to make them fold at 10. And then the counter argument to that is if you know that they won't bluff here, that you should just fold a 10 facing a jam. And in reality, I think that you should be very selective when looking at these spots to bluff. I thought this hand made sense because ace sends the nuts. So you want to have an ace. An ace queen's probably strong enough to call. Or at least I would be calling it. If you fold ace queen, you're going to fold too much. So this seemed like the most natural fit for a bluff. And given that I'm going to have all my ace 10 combos here, you know, even if I just use ace jack and ace 10, I'd be fine. Because I'd have 16 combos ace 10 and 12 combos ace jack. The question starts to become a couple of things. First off, does your opponent trap ace 10 on the turn? I think in general most players do. I think it's generally the better play. So I think when they bet here, they are most likely going to have a 10 when they're value betting. And maybe it's also worth noting, I think that the big blinds generally under bluff this spot because they have to pick just kind of non-equity turn bets in order to bluff river. I mean, some kind of clear ones to bet if you did bet the turn are like 9-8, 9-7. Maybe ace-2 if you decided to bet that. But in general, the big blinds under bluffing. And in general, when they go bet here, they're going to have a 10. So the problem is now for the big blind when they bet here and get jammed on. What do you do? And I like my playing the small blind, I think, in retrospect. Even if you play some people that never fold, you play some people that always fold, it's kind of hard to guess what people are going to do. Maybe if you're playing aggressive people that you think are stationary, you can just only value bet. But like I'm going to have to advocate for just a good balanced strategy. Because the thing is, if you have a 10 here, I mean, I guess thinking a little more complex about the removal, if he has a 10 here, then I have 12 combos ace 10 and 12 combos ace jack. Then I'm over bluffing. So you actually have to map your bluffs based on the fact he has a 10, which means you have to once in a while just call or fold ace jack, and I'm okay with that. I was probably over bluffing here at the time slightly then. Again, you have to always factor in your opponent's removal when you're looking at these spots because if you don't, you're going to bluff too much or too little or whatever, or too much probably. Okay, so the question becomes in the big blind. We're getting a little bit off topic here, but it's fun, so why not? The question is, here in the big blind, what do we do with our 10s? And I think that when you have a 10, I think a non-paired 10 is generally a better bet call than a paired 10. Because you have a paired 10, particularly a queen or a jack, although you're not really going to have those that probe turn. I guess maybe queen 10. I guess if you have a hand like queen 10 or queen 10 or 10-9, those probably make worse calls because your opponent has to pick bluffs and they're probably going to do it when they have a pair and an ace. So maybe a way to do this would be when you have a hand like king 10, 10-8, 10-7 and lower, you can bet call and other ones can bet fold. However, if you're always going to bet call that many 10s, and 10s are that much of your range, you're actually exploitable with how much you're bet calling because I'm risking 4,800 to win 1K. The other side of it is if he thinks that I'm just going to jam a 10 trying to get him off a chop, then things go south quickly for my ability to bluff because then he's just betting a 10 hoping to call a jam, thinking if I have a 10, I'm almost always going to be jamming. In general here, when I have a 10, I'm probably going for a small raise, and then maybe picking another hand to bluff with. Like maybe a good one here would be a hand like ace 9. Pick another one of the slightly lower hands to bluff with for that size. Also ace 9, maybe ace 9 is debatably a better call because you block 10-9, so you actually block a couple of the combos. But if you think 9-8, 9-7 are the bluff combos, it kind of all becomes a moot point. So anyway, if he thinks that you're going to raise this size with a 10 and some bluffs and ace 10, he's getting a lot more attractive. He's getting a lot more attractive odds to call. So in general, I would probably pick an all-in size here with the nuts and one bluff that can't quite call, and then I would construct a smaller raise size with 10x, probably raising min, and working in some bluffs there as well. However, you can't bluff that size nearly as much because they're getting such a good price. And maybe, but the more I'm thinking about it, I like that I'm just in a hand. I'm like kind of changing my strategy. I'm just trying to think more about it as I go along. If they have a 10, there's no reason to raise here min. They're either going to call or they're going to fold, right? So if they bet the size, raising min doesn't do anything because they're either bluffing or they have a 10. So your size should be all in. It should be ace 10. It should be 10x. And then you should occasionally work on a hand like ace-jack, but probably not nearly as much as I was originally planning, because then he's going to chop with 10x and additionally beat ace-jack. So maybe this needs to be more like 6 combos ace-jack. So you can randomize half your combos, jam your 10x, and then also jam your ace-10. And your goal would be for his overall equity with a 10 to be not quite high enough to call the jam with all of his 10x, or really with his 10x, be about break even. And then what he should do is, because the range is about break even, he should then fold most 10x, because he has mainly 10x here, and call particularly with 10x that he thinks the removal is particularly pleasant, like maybe king 10 and weak 10x or non-paired 10x. He could also randomize and just call like around a third of his 10x, and he would be fine. But I think calling with queen 10 or 10-9 are probably the worst hands to bet call. All right, I know this one was confusing, but main things to take away: all-in size is the only size that makes sense. If they're not going to bet ace 10, you should definitely be jamming 10x. And make sure to pick a range of hands that makes his call with a 10 break even, considering his removal. So I was probably, again, over bluffing here. Probably need to use a smaller portion of bluffs. All right. This is my one value bet I wanted to work in here really quick just to show that I do, in fact, sometimes have strong hands. Check back on the flop. This hand does not do well betting for value here. Too unlikely to get paid. Bet call. Bet, and this is a spot where you're only going to have one size because your opponent can definitely have king-jack, can definitely have jack-8. So you're going to use a small normal, like 3x approximately raise size. You're going to use hands like 2-pair or better, and then you're going to mix in bluffs with probably a hand like, probably a good one would be a hand like jack-4, where you block the straights, and you have a pair that's not quite good enough to call. You're going to have a lot of queen x on this board. You're going to have some 10x, so then you're going to have some straights as well. So you can have like a bunch of stronger hands here to where I don't think you have to call down a 4. If you think that maybe some 4s have to call, then maybe call with the ones like ace 4 and use jack 4 as a bluff. But I think jack 4 is a pretty natural bluff raise here. You're going to have 12 combos of that. So actually, we start off with the value as always. We're going to have king jack, probably all combos, 16 combos king jack, or at least 12. I'm going to mainly check that hand on the flop. Jack 8, I'm probably going to be generally either betting the flop or folding the turn. What's turn size? Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be calling jack 8 really. So 12 combos king jack. You're going to have queen 9 at least half the time, so let's call it 4 combos that, 16 combos. You're going to have 9-9, so 19 combos. Queen 4, queen 3 also are going to be raises depending on if you're opening suited or offsuit variants. So something along the lines of 36-ish combos. So you're going to be able to have around 15 combos of bluffs, 16 combos of bluffs, which means you could use jack 4 and maybe a little bit of jack 3 as your bluffs. Again, we're going to pick the pairs that can't quite call and then pick removal that's the best. You should probably be bluffing the jack 3 when you do not have a spade because you want them to be more likely to have jack X of spades. Okay. And this should be our final hand here, which is good because I'm losing my voice. Ace 2 open call. Check, check. I don't mind mixing this up with this hand. Betting here on the flop, and then on club turns, I'm looking to go for the triple. That said, not that great. I would like it against opponents that play really weak on the flop. Jungle is kind of average as far as flop fold goes, so maybe it doesn't really matter too much either way. But if you start checking too many of these ace X hands back, you're going to have some trouble on the turn. Turn, we have a clear call, bottom pair, and some playability across different rivers. And river, so we start off with the value range. We're going to have king X of clubs, a few king X's of clubs. Our opponent's unlikely to have a hand like the nut flush. A lot of those hands are checking the turn. So when we raise the river, we're going to have two sizes. We're going to have a small size with straights and some lower flushes like 7x of clubs. And we're going to work in some bluffs there as well. Actually, let's do the value. So If we have the nut flush or the second nut flush, we're going to go all in most of the time, 80% of the time. We're going to have a small portion of that range raise small as well. So let's say that the nut flush and the second nut flush are going to go all in 80% of the time. We've got about 6-7 combos of the nut flush. So between that and probably 3-ish combos of the second nut flush, we have around 10 combos that are going all in here. Then we're also going to have a small raise size, and we're going to have all ace-4s. So that's going to be 16 combos of ace-4. And then we're additionally going to have a few hands like, we're not going to have 6-4. So ace-4, 7x of clubs, the small portion of ace-x and king-x of clubs. And that's kind of it. It's going to be straights and flushes. So if we raise all in here, we're going to have 10 combos for value. Given that we get to bluff more with the all-in size, we can have around 7-ish combos as bluffs. So we're going to pick in this spot probably ace-2 with the ace of clubs and ace-3 with the ace of clubs. Planning on calling down ace-5 with the ace of clubs because on this board it has great removal to call down. And obviously calling down ace-7. The question then becomes, what's our small raise range? And it's going to be the straights, all of the ace-4s, the 7x of clubs, and the few nut flush and second nut flushes that we decide to raise. We're going to go around a 3x size and make it around 1600 here. And then if our opponent jams, well, if our opponent jams, it's a tough spot, but we can't only call flushes. We can call the nut flush, second nut flush, 7x of clubs. You're probably also going to have to call a couple of straights, which in this case would be hands. I think the best hand would be ace of clubs 4x. So that way, you know, yeah, it's going to suck when you do have ace of clubs 4x and he jams, but your blocker is too significant to let it go. And you are generally going to be calling mid to good flushes when you do raise small and call a jam. As far as the bluffs go, we already picked our all-in bluffs, so we're going to pick the best next bluffs that we have that are not the all-in bluffs, which I believe in this case is probably going to be hands like king deuce with the king of clubs, and then maybe a hand like ace king with the ace of clubs. Those make sense. We picked our all-in bluffs that couldn't quite call, and now we're going to work in the small raise bluffs. And given that we have around 25 combos of value raises, we get to have around 11 or 12 bluff combos. And ace king with the ace of clubs is 3 combos. King deuce with the king of clubs is 3 combos. So maybe we actually get to pick a couple more. Maybe ace jack with the ace of clubs as well. Now then we're at 9. So we actually could probably even do one more, maybe ace 10, ace of clubs as well. So we start off with value. We start off with picking our size. We establish combos for value in both. We pick the best bluffs of the fold for the all-in range because it's more the removal is more relevant in those hands. And then we pick the removal, the hands remaining with the best removal for the small raise range. We also always take a small portion of the nutted hands and put them in the small raise range so that we're covered. And we always consider what hands we're going to call a jam with when we raise small. Okay. I think that's a pretty good walkthrough here on how to raise after facing turn probe. And we're going to move on into talking about, let's look at the next spot. Let's look at when they probe turn, we call, and they check river. Let's talk a little bit about that spot particularly.